It was easier to believe the story I was being told, the one about the perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect partnership. It was a beautiful story, after all. And for a little while longer, I was determined to live in it. The picket fence was white, the garden was blooming, and from the outside, our house looked as solid as a fortress. I had no idea it was built on a sinkhole, and the ground was already starting to give way. The end of my world didn't arrive with a bang. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful confession. It arrived silently, on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered through the cold, impersonal glow of my phone screen. It was a day like any other. The sky outside my office window was a placid, unassuming blue. I was in the middle of cataloging a collection of letters from a Civil War soldier to his wife, his elegant, looping cursive a stark contrast to the brutal reality he described. The letters were a testament to love and endurance across distance and devastation. I felt a sense of profound connection to this woman from the past, reading the words that were her only link to the man she loved. My phone buzzed on the corner of my desk. I glanced at it, expecting a message from Olivia about our weekly yoga class. Instead, I saw James's name. A small smile touched my lips. He was on a business trip in Miami, supposedly schmoozing a potential high-net-worth client. He'd been gone for 2 days and was due back tomorrow. I picked up the phone, my smile faltering as I read the words on the screen. It wasn't a long message. It was brutally efficient, devoid of any of the warmth or affection that had defined our 8 years together. Amelia, I'm not coming home. I've met someone else. I want a divorce. I've taken my half of our money from the joint account. My lawyer will be in touch. I read it once. Then a second time. The words seemed to float, disconnected from reality. It felt like a prank, a cruel, nonsensical joke. This wasn't James. My James, the man who called me every day at lunch, who held my hand during scary movies, who knew that I hated the texture of coconut. He wouldn't do this. Not like this. A text message? It was the kind of thing you read about, a story of some callous, cowardly stranger. Not my husband. My fingers trembled as I tried to call him. The call went straight to voicemail. His voice, cheerful and professional, filled my ear. You've reached James. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. I hung up without leaving a message. What would I even say? I tried again. Straight to voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. The panic began to set in, a cold, constricting band around my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The letters from the soldier lay on my desk, his words of love and longing a mocking testament to a fidelity that no longer existed in my own life. I felt a sudden, dizzying wave of nausea. I stumbled out of my office, mumbling something about feeling unwell to my concerned colleague, and made my way to the restroom. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. A stranger looked back at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. This wasn't happening. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe his phone was stolen. Maybe he was in some kind of trouble and was being forced to send this. The rational part of my brain, the archivist who dealt in evidence, knew how flimsy these theories were. But the wife, the woman who had built her entire adult life around this man, clung to them like a life raft. I drove home in a daze, the familiar streets of my neighborhood feeling alien and menacing. Every happy couple I saw walking their dog, every family playing in their front yard, felt like a personal insult. When I got home, Buster greeted me at the door, his tail wagging, blissfully unaware that our family had just been fractured. I sank to the floor and buried my face in his soft fur, the first sob escaping my lips, a ragged, ugly sound that tore through the quiet house. After the initial wave of grief subsided, a sliver of desperate hope remained. This had to be a mistake. A massive, terrible misunderstanding. I needed proof. I needed to see the bank account. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type my password into the laptop. I navigated to our bank's website, my breath held tight in my chest. The joint checking and savings account pages loaded. And then I saw it. The screen confirmed the cold, hard reality of his text message. Our joint savings account, the one we had painstakingly built, the one that held our emergency fund, our travel dreams, our future, was nearly empty. There was a single, massive wire transfer made that morning. The recipient was an account number I didn't recognize. The amount was staggering, well over 6 figures. He had left me with just enough to cover the mortgage for the next month. He hadn't taken his half. He had taken almost everything. The sight of those numbers, the stark black and white finality of the transaction, was what finally shattered my denial. This wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated, deliberate act of cruelty. He hadn't just left me, he had financially gutted me. He had left me vulnerable and stranded, all while he was starting a new life with someone else. The pain was physical, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. The betrayal was a bitter, acidic taste in my mouth. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the demolition of my entire reality. The man I had loved and trusted, the man I had built a life with, was a stranger. And he had just set fire to everything we had ever built, leaving me alone in the ashes, with nothing but a text message and a drained bank account. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by something new, something cold and hard and sharp. It was the first flicker of rage. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he was dealing with a quiet, meek archivist who would crumble. He was wrong. He had forgotten that my life's work was digging through the past to find the truth. And I was about to make his past my new, personal project. I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb that always felt like a postcard from a life I was lucky enough to live. For the past 5 years, my world was a small, 2-story house with a garden I meticulously cared for, a golden retriever named Buster, and my husband, James. I'm an archivist at the city's historical society, a job that suits my quiet, methodical nature. I find comfort in order, in the careful preservation of stories from the past. My own story, I believed, was a simple, happy one. But the thing about well-preserved histories is that they're often built on carefully curated facts, with the messy, inconvenient truths tucked away in unlabeled boxes. My story was no different. I just didn't know I was the last person to find the hidden files. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The life James and I built was, by all accounts, perfect. It was a life constructed with the deliberate precision of a master architect, every joint and beam seemingly flawless. We met in our final year of university, he, a charismatic business major with a smile that could disarm armies, and I, a history student more comfortable in the dusty silence of the library than at a party. He said he loved my quiet confidence, the way I saw the world through a lens of stories and context. I was captivated by his energy, the way he moved through life with an effortless grace that made everything seem possible. We married 2 years after graduation. He was just starting his career as a financial advisor, and I had secured an internship at the city archives. Our beginnings were humble. We rented a tiny apartment above a laundromat, the constant hum of the dryers a soundtrack to our early life together. We ate instant noodles on the floor because we hadn't bought a table yet, and we'd talk for hours about the future. He'd sketch out our dream house on a napkin, complete with a porch swing and a big yard for the dog we'd one day get. I'd describe the custom-built library I wanted, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a rolling ladder. We were a team, partners in a grand project of building a future. And we did it. James was brilliant with money, not just for his clients, but for us. His career took off with a velocity that was almost dizzying. He had a knack for networking, for making people feel seen and important, a skill that translated into a roster of wealthy, loyal clients. Within 3 years, we had the down payment for the house he'd sketched on that napkin. It was a charming colonial on a street where neighbors waved to each other and kids' laughter filled the air on summer evenings. We bought the porch swing. We adopted Buster. We even built my library, turning the spare bedroom into a sanctuary of wood and paper. Our life fell into a comfortable, happy rhythm. I loved my job. It was a quiet, steady passion. I spent my days piecing together the fragmented narratives of our city's past, handling delicate documents and photographs that told the tales of lives long gone. My work was about finding the truth, about ensuring that history was recorded accurately. At home, I believed I was living a truth of my own. James was the perfect husband. He'd call me every day at lunch, just to hear my voice. He'd bring me flowers for no reason, remembering that I loved sunflowers because I said they looked unapologetically happy. He'd rub my feet after a long day and listen patiently as I recounted some obscure historical fact I'd uncovered. Our friends saw us as the ideal couple. "You two are the gold standard," my friend Olivia would often say, half joking, half envious. At dinner parties, we were a well-oiled machine. He would charm the guests with his stories and business acumen, while I would ensure everyone felt welcome and at ease. We were Emilio and James, a single entity, a brand of marital success. He was the outgoing, ambitious one, I was the calm, steady anchor. It worked. Or so I believed. Looking back, the signs were there, small and almost insignificant cracks in the perfect facade. They were the kind of things you dismiss, the little anomalies you explain away because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. There was the sudden need for him to work late, chalked up to a demanding new client. There were the business trips that became more frequent, always to conferences in cities known more for their nightlife than their financial seminars. There were the hushed phone calls he'd take in the other room, his voice a low murmur. When I'd ask, he'd just smile that disarming smile and say, "Just a client in a panic, honey. You know how they are." I always did. I trusted him. Trust was the foundation of our house, the very ground it was built on. Without it, the whole structure was just a collection of wood and nails, waiting to collapse. There were financial oddities, too. As a financial advisor, James handled all our finances. It made sense. I was good with history, he was good with money. He set up our joint account, managed our investments, and paid our bills. I never felt the need to look too closely. I saw the quarterly statements he left on the kitchen counter, showing our net worth steadily growing. It felt like a validation of our hard work, of his brilliance. But occasionally, I'd notice a charge on the credit card statement that seemed out of place, a dinner at a restaurant I'd never been to, a purchase from a high-end boutique I didn't frequent. He always had a plausible explanation. "That was a client dinner, remember I told you about it," or "I bought a gift for my new assistant, she's been a lifesaver." The explanations were smooth, logical, and delivered with such confidence that to question them would have felt accusatory and paranoid. I was not a paranoid person. I was a historian. I dealt in facts, in evidence. I had no evidence of wrongdoing, only a vague, unsettling feeling that I would quickly push aside, ashamed of my own suspicion. The most significant crack appeared about 6 months before everything fell apart. It was our anniversary. James had promised a special weekend away at a boutique hotel in the wine country. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, a chance to reconnect without the distractions of work and daily life. The day before we were due to leave, he called me at work. His voice was strained. "Honey, I am so sorry. The Henderson deal just exploded. I have to fly to Chicago tonight to put out the fire. We'll have to postpone." I was disappointed, but I understood. His job was high pressure. "Of course, darling," I said, my voice more cheerful than I felt. "We'll celebrate when you get back. Be safe." He was gone for 3 days. When he came back, he was exhausted but triumphant, bearing a beautiful, expensive necklace as a peace offering. "The deal is saved," he announced, fastening the cool diamonds around my neck. And this is a down payment on our rescheduled anniversary trip. He was so proud, so relieved, that my disappointment melted away, replaced by pride in my successful, hard-working husband. I put the strange feeling I had, the fleeting, baseless thought that something was off, into one of those unlabeled boxes in the back of my mind. The first 24 hours were a blur of shock and grief. I moved through my house like a ghost, the silence amplifying the screaming in my head. I called his number 100 times. I sent him a flurry of texts, ranging from pleading to furious. There was no response. It was as if he had ceased to exist. The man I had shared a bed with, the man whose scent still lingered on his pillow, had vanished, leaving behind only a digital crater where our life used to be. On the second day, the fog of despair began to lift, burned away by the rising sun of fury. The archivist in me, the woman who organized chaos for a living, took over. Grief was a paralyzing, shapeless entity. Anger, however, was a catalyst. Anger was energy. It demanded action. James had made a critical error. He had assumed I would fall apart, that I would be too devastated to fight back. He had underestimated me. He saw me as Amelia, his quiet, unassuming wife. He had forgotten that I was Amelia, the meticulous, patient archivist who could spend weeks tracing a single, faded signature through a century of documents. My first call was to Olivia. I explained everything through choked sobs, the words tumbling out in a torrent of pain and disbelief. She was at my house within the hour, a bottle of wine in one hand and a box of tissues in the other. But when she saw the look on my face, the hard, determined set of my jaw, she put them both down. "Liv," I said, my voice steady for the first time in 2 days. "I'm not going to just let him do this. He didn't take half. He took everything. He planned this. And I'm going to find out why, and I'm going to make him pay." Olivia, ever the practical paralegal, nodded, her expression shifting from sympathy to strategy. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "Okay, Amelia. What do you need?" "I need information," I said. "He thinks he's erased himself, but no one ever truly disappears. There are always breadcrumbs. I just need to find them." My investigation didn't start with a private investigator or a lawyer. It started in my own home, in the office we had shared. It started with the man's digital life, the one he had so carelessly left behind. James was tech-savvy, but he was also arrogant. He believed he was smarter than everyone else, and that belief made him sloppy. He had closed his social media accounts and blocked my number, but he had forgotten about the myriad of other digital tendrils that connected him to our life. The first breadcrumb was the family iPad. It was a shared device we used for browsing recipes, streaming movies, and planning trips. He had his own personal tablet for work, so he rarely used this one. He hadn't bothered to wipe it. I opened the web browser, and my heart began to pound. His Google account was still logged in. His search history, his location data, his saved passwords, a complete digital blueprint of his secret life. I felt a pang of guilt, a feeling of invading his privacy. But he had obliterated any right to privacy when he texted me a divorce notice and looted our bank account. This wasn't an invasion, it was an excavation. I started with the location history. For the past 6 months, while he was supposedly at late-night meetings or on business trips, his phone's GPS data told a very different story. The Chicago conference to save the Henderson deal? His phone had never left our city. Instead, it had spent 3 days pinging from a location in a trendy downtown neighborhood, a high-rise condo building I'd never seen before. The Miami business trip he was currently on? His phone's location was right there on the map, a blinking blue, that very same condo building. He had never even gone to the airport. My hands shook as I took a screenshot of the map. He had been lying for months, not just about his whereabouts, but about the very fabric of his work life. The late nights, the stressful deals, it was all an elaborate fiction. Next, I delved into his search history. It was a nauseating journey into the mind of a cheater. Searches for best romantic restaurants in the city, luxury lingerie brands, weekend getaways for two. There were searches for apartment listings in the same downtown neighborhood his phone had been tracking to. He hadn't been planning a business trip, he had been building a new life. Then I found the digital receipts. He was a meticulous record keeper, a habit from his finance job. He had a folder in his email, cleverly labeled tax documents, filled with receipts for his expense reports. They were all there, a detailed accounting of his betrayal. Dinners at five-star restaurants, hotel bookings under his name, jewelry purchases from stores I'd never set foot in. There was a receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet from 3 months ago. It wasn't the necklace he had given me after his Chicago trip. It was another, far more expensive piece of jewelry. The final, and most damning, piece of evidence came from the photo stream. Tucked away in a hidden album, protected by a simple password I guessed on the second try, the name of his childhood dog, were the pictures. Dozens of them. James with a woman. A young woman, beautiful and vibrant, with long blonde hair and a radiant smile. They were in a restaurant, clinking champagne glasses. They were on a boat, the wind in her hair as she laughed, her arm draped possessively around his shoulder. They were in an apartment that was clearly the one he had been looking at online, its minimalist decor a stark contrast to our cozy, cluttered home. The last photo was a selfie. She was wearing the diamond tennis bracelet. I didn't know her name, but I knew her face. It was Sophia, a junior marketing intern from his firm. He had mentioned her once or twice, calling her a bright kid. She was 24, a whole decade younger than me. Seeing them together, so happy and carefree, was like a physical blow. The life in those photos was vibrant, exciting, and new. It made my own life with him, our comfortable routines and quiet evenings, seem dull and provincial by comparison. I spent the rest of the day meticulously documenting everything. I took screenshots. I downloaded photos. I printed out receipts and bank statements. I cross-referenced the dates of his business trips with the dates on the receipts and the GPS data. I created a timeline, a detailed, undeniable record of his deceit. The archivist in me was methodical, detached, treating the evidence of my husband's betrayal like a historical collection to be catalogued and preserved. It was the only way I could get through it without completely falling apart. By the time the sun set, I had a thick folder, both digital and physical. It was a comprehensive dossier on James's double life. He had thought he could simply press delete on our marriage. He thought he could walk away with the money and a new life, leaving me with nothing. But he had left behind a trail of digital breadcrumbs, and I had followed them to the bitter, devastating truth. The grief was still there, a heavy, aching stone in my chest. But now, it was accompanied by a cold, clear sense of purpose. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about justice. And I had all the evidence I needed to start building my case. Armed with my file of evidence, the next step was to understand the full scope of the financial devastation. James had been a financial advisor. He hadn't just cheated on me, he had used his professional expertise to systematically dismantle our financial life for his own benefit. The wire transfer was just the most blatant act. I needed to know how deep the rot went. This was where my own professional skills, which I had long considered a quiet, academic pursuit, became my most powerful weapon. I wasn't a forensic accountant, but my work as an archivist had trained me to see patterns, to follow faint trails, and to understand that the most important information is often hidden in plain sight, buried under layers of mundane data. I spent the next week combing through years of financial records. I requested paper statements from our banks and credit card companies, not trusting the digital versions he might have manipulated. I laid them all out on the dining room table, turning our marital home into a war room. Buster would lay his head on my lap, whining softly, as if sensing my distress. It was worse than I could have imagined. James hadn't just started a new life, he had been funding it with our money for at least 2 years. The small, questionable charges I had once dismissed were not isolated incidents. They were part of a sustained campaign of financial infidelity. There were hundreds of them, Ubers to and from the downtown condo, lavish dinners, designer clothes, even cash withdrawals from ATMs near Sophia's apartment, all cleverly disguised as business expenses or hidden within our everyday spending. But the truly insidious part was what he had done with our investments. The quarterly statements he had left on the counter for me to see were fakes. He had used his knowledge of graphic design software to create convincing forgeries, showing healthy, steady growth in our portfolio. The real statements, which I now held in my hands, told a different story. Over the past 18 months, he had been systematically liquidating our shared assets, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and moving the money into a private account under his name alone. It was a slow, methodical bleed, designed to go unnoticed by a wife who trusted him completely. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. He had woven a completely separate financial reality, a phantom portfolio to keep me placated while he funneled our life savings into his new life. He hadn't just taken his half. By the time he emptied the joint savings account, he had already stolen tens of thousands more through the liquidated investments. The man I married, the partner I trusted with my future, had been committing financial fraud against me for years. This discovery changed everything. It elevated his actions from a simple, albeit cruel, betrayal to a criminal offense. This wasn't just a divorce case anymore. This was fraud. With this new, damning evidence, I finally went to see a lawyer. Olivia had given me a name, Maya, a sharp, no-nonsense family law attorney she had worked with. Maya was Olivia's age, but she carried herself with the authority of someone 20 years her senior. I laid out my file on her polished mahogany desk. I walked her through the timeline, the GPS data, the photos, and finally, the forged and real investment statements. She listened intently, her expression hardening with each piece of evidence I presented. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, looking over the documents. Finally, she looked up at me, a glint of steel in her eyes. "Amelia," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This is one of the most comprehensive cases of marital fraud I have ever seen. Your husband isn't just a cheater. He's a crook. And he is going to regret the day he decided to cross a woman who knows how to do her homework." Maya's validation was like a balm on my raw nerves. For the first time since I read that text message, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. She explained the legal ramifications. We could sue him for the fraudulent conveyance of assets. We could file a motion to freeze his known accounts immediately. We could even report his actions to the financial regulatory authorities, which could jeopardize his license and his career. But, Maya cautioned, we need to be smart. He thinks he's in the clear. He's sitting in his new condo with his new girlfriend and what he thinks is all the money. He feels untouchable. We can use that arrogance against him. A direct legal assault will make him dig in his heels. We might get the money back, eventually, but it will be a long, ugly fight. What do you suggest? I asked, leaning forward. We let him think he's won, Maya said, a sly smile playing on her lips. His lawyer will send our official separation agreement. We will contest it, of course, but we will do so quietly, through the proper channels. We will drag our feet. In the meantime, you and I will gather more information. We need to find where he moved the rest of the money. That private account you mentioned? It's likely just a temporary holding place. He's a financial advisor, he knows how to hide assets. We need to find them before we make our move. Her plan was brilliant. It appealed to my methodical nature. James was expecting hysterics, angry phone calls, a messy, emotional battle. He wasn't expecting a quiet, calculated, strategic campaign. He had written a narrative where he was the victor, escaping his boring life for a new, exciting one. He had no idea that I was now the author of the story, and I was about to write a very different ending for his character. The next few weeks were a strange, surreal dance. I lived my life on the surface, going to work, walking Buster, meeting Olivia for yoga. I projected an image of a woman who was heartbroken but coping. But beneath the surface, I was a detective. With Maya's guidance, we hired a forensic accountant, a man named Mr. Peterson, who was semi-retired and delighted by the challenge. He called James's financial maneuvers amateur hour and took great pleasure in untangling the web he had woven. Mr. Peterson discovered that James had been funneling the money from his secret account into a series of shell corporations, paper-thin entities with no real business operations, designed for the sole purpose of hiding his assets. And the primary shareholder of the largest shell corporation, the one holding the bulk of our stolen life savings? It wasn't James. It was Sophia. He hadn't just bought her a bracelet, he had made her a business partner in his crime. He had put our future in her name, likely believing it would be untouchable in a divorce proceeding. It was another layer of betrayal, another testament to his calculated cruelty. But it was also his biggest mistake. By involving Sophia, he had created another point of failure, another thread we could pull to unravel his entire scheme. I looked at the corporate registration documents, at Sophia's looping, youthful signature on the dotted line. She had no idea what she had signed. She was just a pawn in his game, a dazzled 24-year-old swept up in a fantasy funded by my money. James had built a second life, a carefully constructed fortress of lies and stolen assets. But he had built it on a foundation of arrogance and greed. And I was about to send in a wrecking ball. The plan Maya and I devised was not about quick, fiery revenge. It was about a slow, cold, and methodical dismantling of the world James had built. It required patience, precision, and a deep understanding of my husband's greatest weaknesses, his ego and his obsession with his professional reputation. He had built his career on an image of trustworthiness and financial genius. That image was the cornerstone of his identity. It was also his biggest vulnerability. Our first move was strategic silence. As Maya predicted, a letter arrived from a high-powered law firm, a formal notice of James's intent to file for divorce. It came with a proposed settlement agreement that was so insulting it was almost laughable. He offered me the house, which was still heavily mortgaged, and my own car. He would keep his own car, his pension, and all personal and business assets currently under his control. It was the legal equivalent of him leaving me with the empty shell of our life while he walked away with all the contents. My first instinct was to scream, to call him and unleash the torrent of rage I had been suppressing for weeks. But I followed Maya's advice. We didn't respond with fury. We responded with a calm, formal request for a complete financial disclosure, a standard procedure in any divorce. We knew he would provide fraudulent documents, the same kind of faked statements he had shown me for years. And that was exactly what we wanted. While we waited for his doctored paperwork, I focused on the second part of our plan, gathering intelligence. I knew James's habits, his routines, his digital footprint. I started by creating a new, anonymous social media profile. A ghost account. From this vantage point, I could observe Sophia's life. Unlike James, who had gone dark online, Sophia was a prolific oversharer. Her profile was public, a curated stream of her perfect new life. There were pictures of her in the condo, captioned "Home Sweet Home." There were photos of expensive dinners, weekends away, and shopping sprees. She even posted a picture of her wrist, adorned with the diamond tennis bracelet, with the caption, "He spoils me." Every post was a new twist of the knife in my heart. But I forced myself to look at it all with the detached eye of a researcher. I wasn't looking at my replacement, I was looking at the physical evidence of James's fraud. I saved every photo, every receipt she carelessly displayed, every location she tagged. She was, without realizing it, the star witness against her own benefactor. The most crucial piece of information came from an unexpected source, James's own ego. He was the keynote speaker at an upcoming regional wealth management conference. It was a big deal for him, a chance to solidify his reputation as a rising star in the industry. He had been talking about it for months before he left. I found the conference schedule online. He was set to speak on the final day, in the main ballroom, on the topic of ethical practices and building client trust. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. This was it. This was our stage. The conference would be filled with his colleagues, his clients, his mentors, and the city's financial elite. It was the heart of the world he valued more than anything. It was the perfect place to expose him. Now that we had our stage, we needed to set it. Maya and I worked with Mr. Peterson to compile our evidence into a clear, undeniable package. We created a bound report, a professional, damning document that we titled the Sterling Asset Management Case Study. It detailed, with cold, hard facts, the systematic fraud James had committed. It included the real and forged investment statements side by side. It had the timeline of his secret life, corroborated by GPS data. It had the corporate registration documents for the shell companies. It even had a selection of Sophia's social media posts, showcasing the lavish lifestyle funded by the stolen assets, with the dates corresponding to the liquidation of my portfolio. The final piece of the puzzle was leverage. We needed to ensure that when the trap was sprung, James would have no way out. Maya discovered that the managing partner of James's firm, a man named Arthur Vance, was a stickler for ethics and had a notoriously low tolerance for scandal. He was also scheduled to give the opening remarks at the conference. The plan was set. A week before the conference, Maya sent a letter to James's lawyer, formally rejecting the settlement offer and stating our intent to file a suit for fraudulent conveyance and embezzlement. Crucially, we did not include our evidence. We wanted him to feel a prickle of fear, but not full-blown panic. We wanted him to walk onto that stage feeling confident, believing he could crush this with his expensive lawyers. The day before the conference, I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I drove to the downtown condo building. I had never been there before, and seeing it in person, the gleaming tower of glass and steel, felt like staring at a monument to my own failure. I sat in my car for a long time, my heart pounding. Then I took a deep breath, walked into the lobby, and handed a sealed envelope to the concierge. It was addressed to Sophia. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the Shell Corporation's registration, with her name and signature clearly visible. At the bottom, I had written a simple, unsigned note: accessory to felony fraud carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. He will not protect you. It was a calculated risk. I didn't want to scare her into running. I wanted to plant a seed of doubt. I wanted her to look at James, the charming, successful man she adored, and see him for what he was, a criminal who had used her as a shield. I wanted her to be scared, to be confused, and to be thinking about her own future when everything came crashing down. That evening, I went home and laid out my outfit for the next day. It was a simple, elegant navy blue dress. An outfit that conveyed quiet strength and professionalism. I was not going to the conference as a scorned wife. I was going as a historian, there to present a factual account of events. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The audience was about to arrive. All that was left was for the curtain to rise. The morning of the conference was cold and gray, the sky a bruised purple. It suited my mood. I felt a strange, unnerving calm, the kind that comes when you've prepared for a battle and there's nothing left to do but wait for it to begin. Maya and Olivia met me for breakfast, a last council of war. Olivia squeezed my hand under the table, her eyes full of fierce loyalty. Maya simply gave me a crisp, confident nod. "Showtime," she said. We arrived at the hotel ballroom and took our seats at a table near the back. The room was already buzzing with energy, a sea of dark suits and the low hum of financial chatter. I saw Arthur Vance, the managing partner, near the stage, shaking hands and looking distinguished. I scanned the crowd for James, but he was nowhere to be seen. He would be in the green room, preparing, basking in the anticipation of his moment in the spotlight. Just as the lights began to dim, a messenger delivered a package to Mr. Vance. It was our case study, professionally bound and sealed. a similar package was being delivered to the local bureau of the Financial Regulatory Authority at that exact moment. Arthur Vance opened the conference with a speech about the importance of integrity in their industry. As he spoke, I saw him discreetly open the package and begin to read. I watched his face change. His affable, confident expression slowly tightened, his brow furrowed, and a muscle began to twitch in his jaw. By the time he finished his remarks and introduced the next speaker, he looked like he had swallowed a stone. An hour later, it was James's turn. He walked onto the stage to a round of applause, looking every bit the successful, charismatic professional. He was wearing a new, impeccably tailored suit. He flashed his signature smile at the audience, a smile I now recognized as a predator's camouflage. "Good morning," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Today, I want to talk about the most valuable asset in our profession. It's not stocks, it's not bonds. It's trust." As he launched into his hypocritical sermon, Maya and I got up and quietly made our way to the two conference assistants manning the presentation laptop. Maya showed them a court order, a subpoena for evidence in a pending fraud case, that compelled the venue to comply with our request. The assistants, wide-eyed and flustered, stepped aside. Maya plugged a USB stick into the laptop. On stage, James was warming to his topic. Building trust means being transparent. It means putting your client's interests above your own. It means that your word is your bond. At that moment, the large screen behind him, which was supposed to be showing his corporate logo, flickered. It was replaced by a high-resolution image of the faked investment statement he had created for me, the one showing our healthy, growing portfolio. James faltered, his words catching in his throat. He glanced behind him, a flicker of confusion on his face. He tried to recover. As I was saying, the image on the screen changed. Now it showed the real statement, the one revealing the systematic liquidation of our assets. The two statements were side by side, the fraudulent figures highlighted in red. A low murmur rippled through the audience. James's face went pale. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. He knew exactly what he was looking at. The image changed again. This time, it was the corporate registration for the shell company, the one established to hide the stolen funds. And in the bottom corner, blown up for all to see, was Sophia's signature. He was frozen, a deer in the headlights. The confident speaker was gone, replaced by a trapped, panicked man. The screen changed one last time. It was a slideshow of Sophia's social media posts. A picture of her on a yacht, raising a glass of champagne. A picture of her new designer handbag. And the final, damning image, her wrist, sparkling with the diamond tennis bracelet, with her caption, "He spoils me," displayed in large, bold letters. Beneath the photo, we had added a simple, brutal timeline, showing the date of the post was just 2 days after James had liquidated the last of our shared retirement fund. The murmur in the ballroom had grown to a loud, shocked buzz. People were pointing at the screen, then at James, then whispering to their neighbors. His carefully constructed world, his reputation, his entire identity, was being incinerated in real time, broadcast on a 20-foot screen in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, completely exposed. His face was a mask of horror and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Then, he turned and practically fled the stage, stumbling down the stairs and out a side exit. As soon as he was gone, Arthur Vance was on the stage, his face grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "Please accept our sincerest apologies. There will be a short intermission." The final act was complete. It was a quiet, brutal, and public execution of a man's reputation. I didn't feel a surge of triumph or joy. I just felt a profound, quiet sense of finality. I had taken the story he had tried to write and I had given it the ending it deserved, based not on emotion, but on cold, hard evidence. I had simply held up a mirror and forced him, and the world, to see the truth. The aftermath of the conference was swift and decisive. It was like watching a building be condemned and demolished in a single day. James's professional life ceased to exist. Arthur Vance, a man who valued his firm's reputation above all else, fired him before he had even made it back to his condo. The firm issued a public statement announcing James's termination due to a serious breach of professional ethics and launched an internal investigation. The Financial Regulatory Authority, armed with our case study, began its own official proceedings. James was finished. His name, once a rising star, was now synonymous with fraud and scandal. His personal life imploded just as spectacularly. The note I had left for Sophia had its intended effect. When James arrived back at the condo, panicked and disgraced, he wasn't met with sympathy. He was met by a terrified young woman who suddenly saw him not as a dashing benefactor, but as the man who was about to drag her down with him. She had spent the day with a lawyer of her own. Faced with the reality of a potential prison sentence, she folded completely. She agreed to cooperate fully with our legal team and the authorities in exchange for immunity. She turned over all her financial records, gave a detailed deposition about James's scheme, and, within a week, had moved out of the condo. The fantasy life he had sold her had dissolved, and she wanted no part of the grim reality that remained. The divorce proceedings were a formality. James, facing ruin on all fronts, had no fight left in him. His high-powered lawyer, seeing the mountain of undeniable evidence against his client, advised him to settle immediately. The agreement was everything Maya and I had demanded. I received 100% of the stolen funds, which were recovered from the shell corporations. I received the house, free and clear, with the mortgage paid off from his share of the assets. I received a significant portion of his pension and future earnings as punitive damages. He was left with nothing but his debts and his disgrace. He had tried to leave me with a single month's mortgage payment. He walked away with barely enough to rent a room. The weeks that followed were strange. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie quiet. The house felt too big, the silence too loud. There were moments of profound sadness, echoes of the life that I had lost. I would catch a whiff of his cologne on an old sweater or see a movie trailer for a film he would have loved, and the grief would wash over me again, a sudden, unexpected wave. The love I had for him hadn't been a lie, even if his had been. And mourning the death of that love, the death of the man I thought he was a necessary part of the healing. But alongside the grief, there was a growing sense of peace, and something I hadn't felt in a very long time, freedom. I was no longer living in a carefully constructed facade. The picket fence was gone, but in its place was an open field of possibility. I sold the big house. It was filled with too many ghosts, too many memories of a life that was a lie. I bought a small, charming condo in a historic part of the city, not far from my work. It had high ceilings, big windows, and a perfect corner for my library. I spent my weekends painting the walls, assembling bookshelves, and making the space my own. Olivia was a constant presence, helping me move boxes, offering advice on paint colors, and celebrating every small victory. One evening, as we sat on the floor of my new living room, eating pizza out of the box, she looked at me and smiled. "You know," she said, "I've never seen you look so much like yourself." I knew what she meant. For the first time, my life was entirely my own, built not on a shared dream, but on my own foundation. My work at the archives took on a new meaning. I had always loved the quiet, methodical process of uncovering the truth about the past. Now, I felt a deeper connection to it. I had applied those same skills to my own life, excavating the truth from a mountain of lies. It had been painful, but it had also been empowering. My quiet, unassuming job had given me the tools I needed to save myself. I didn't date. I wasn't ready. For now, my life was full enough. It was full of my work, my friends, my books, and the simple, quiet joy of a life lived honestly. Buster loved the new apartment and the nearby park, and his happy, uncomplicated presence was a daily reminder of unconditional love. Sometimes, I think about James. I heard he moved to another state, trying to start over, but his reputation followed him. I don't feel anger or hatred towards him anymore. I just feel a kind of distant pity. He built his life on a foundation of lies, and like any structure with a faulty foundation, it was always destined to collapse. My life is smaller now, but it's real. It's a true story, my story. And as an archivist, I know that a true story, with all its imperfections and painful revisions, is always more valuable than a perfect, beautiful lie. I'm Amelia, I'm 28 years old, and for the first time in a long time, I am the sole author of my own history. And the next chapter is just beginning.